Well, here we are. Welcome in NFL Week 3, Toilets to Titles, Dash of DFS. Joe Irachi dropped the leash. JC here with my good friend Jeff Mesha at 2 Tickets to Fantasy. Michael Dirty Jobs, our main man, the engine behind the whole ride, is behind the scenes for us tonight. So it's just Jeff and I, kind of a reunion back to the old 2 Tickets to Fantasy days. We're looking forward to it. Want to quickly start by reminding everybody that you can access Toilets to Titles online, toiletstotitles.com, YouTube. Hit that like button, subscribe, and then Patreon. We are up to 5 tiers of Patreon subscriptions. And with these subscriptions come the key to fantasy success, the key to your friends' respect, and the key to be able to degrade your friends all off season. And that is waiver wire access. That is DFS advice. That is one-on-one lineup advice, start sit advice, articles, and everything in between. Hit Patreon, hit subscribe, hit like us, give us 5-star reviews. And now here we go. It is week 3. We've got a 13-game slate starting tomorrow at 1 p.m. Last week, we're coming off a week where the Jets won a game that they haven't won that type of game in 10 years. We're coming off a game where the Dolphins put 28 up in the fourth quarter on the Baltimore Ravens and shocked them on the road. We're at a point where Jeffrey Mesha told us last week, do not sweat. Do not be worried about Green Bay Packers week 1. This is what they did last year. They bounced back, and he proved to be honest on that one as the Packers obviously bounce back. That being said, Jeffrey Allen Mesha, how you doing tonight?
I appreciate the formal intro there, Joey. I'll tell you, we're missing Mikey today. It's not a dash of DFS without Mike, so we miss you, brother, on the show. It's like pinch hitting for Aaron Judge. It just simply doesn't happen. But we're going to try to do our best and make you proud here, Mikey. You're right. It is a big slate this week. A lot of action in week 3. I mean, this is the NFL. Seems to be a lot of action and a lot of surprises and everything else every single week, just like you brought up, Joe. And I could not have been more dumbfounded by how the Jets-Browns game and the Dolphins-Ravens game ended last week. And we got a ton of action going into this week, but I was just blown away by that.
Yeah, it was. I mean, these games every week, you're up to like a handful. I mean, I'm looking at these scores. Even that Rams-Falcons game ended up being a 31-27 close game. Obviously, Cowboy-Bengal game went down to the wire. The Bengals obviously not looking the way they did last year. Cardinals walk off in overtime at LA, Vegas. Right? Against the Raiders.
Yeah,
Vegas. So yeah, it was nuts. There were a lot of fantasy points. And I mean, we focus on the AFC East. I was going to say AFC least, as it's been for quite a long time from a fantasy perspective, but that's changed. I'll tell you what, you do some quick math, and the AFC East was the way to go from a fantasy perspective last week. The Jets put up 31. The Bills had absolutely no problem putting up 41 on Tennessee. The Dolphins, we've already said it once, put up 42 points, broke all sorts of offensive records against the Ravens. And then you had the Patriots putting up their 17 despite their win. But, even Nelson Aguilar had at least a fantasy heartbeat for the Patriots this week.
Which is the first time in a long time, which kind of reminds me of a point we discussed before. I always say, or I at least said last week, and we said on our show before, don't get caught up in what happened the previous week, and don't just base your picks off of what happened the previous week. There's one other pitfall which happens, to the best of us. I'm a Patriots fan, and so because of that, I'm biased. Obviously, the Bills are going to be the Bills because that's just how they're built this year, and they're going to score a ton of points. But I just simply don't like the Dolphins or the Jets, and because of that, I just kind of tended to stay away from them. we all get caught up in it. You're just your personal feelings. Just don't let that get in the way of how you do your fantasy picks, just because it's really going to be a hindrance, not just each week, but just simply throughout the year in the playoffs. And you probably get caught up in it too every now and then with you being a Giants fan, Eagles, Cowboys, everybody else. We all kind of get caught up in it. So try to keep that in mind as you're making your picks each week.
Yeah, man, I'll tell you what, is right now as a Giants fan, it's hard to not be overexcited at them being 2-0. It's hard to not be, from a fantasy perspective, excited that Saquon Barkley looks like at least some form of his former self. So I do have to keep that in mind. And one real quick thing with the Jets is I was making my DraftKings lineup, this week. It was I can't remember the last time I was considering Jet wide receivers. I was considering Jet running backs. When's the last time we did that? I mean, they had Corey Davis and the rookie Wilson both have big games last week. Both their running backs scored double-digit fantasy points. Flacco put up a good game. I'm not sure I'd be starting Joe Flacco at any point in time. But that being said, it's a 13-game slate this week. And the one thing right off the bat that I found interesting is the largest spread this week is 6 points.
Yeah.
6 points. And the Cleveland line on Thursday was right around 5.5, 6. So we have no game that's over a touchdown spread, which really should make for an extremely exciting week. Obviously with the matchups not being as lopsided, I felt like it took a couple extra minutes to kind of figure out who I like and don't like for the week. But I'll tell you one other thing before we really get into the meat of what we're going to give you guys this week for plays. There is a lot of moving parts from the injury wire right now. Even today, Van Jefferson placed on the IR for the Rams. He's done for a while. Giants announced Kadarius Toney and Wan'Dale Robinson both probably will not play this week. The Baltimore Ravens announced that running back J.K. Dobbins will finally make his 2022 NFL debut against the Patriots week 3. We had Jason Pierre-Paul defensively signing with the Ravens. That's interesting. One surprise today coming out was Sammy Watkins for the Packers was just placed on IR with a hamstring issue. So I mean, if that situation, those rookies really are going to have an opportunity to shine fantasy wise. And then I think the biggest injury question right now offensively going into tomorrow is, can Justin Herbert play against home against Jacksonville, which I'm really hoping he does. With no big spreads, if you're in a survivor pool, it's kind of a tough week. And I was looking at the Chargers, but obviously if they don't have their QB and their leader, I don't think I would go that route. But definitely check back with us on the Blitz in just 13 hours tomorrow morning. We will confirm all of this injury news for you and make sure you have everything you need last minute to make those last second lineup tweaks to get the win. That being said, we are here. We are here week 3. We've got some great matchups. It's a large slate. So, one thing that I look at right off the bat are, where are the games? Where are the points really going to be coming from this week? And the 3 games that I look to be the highest scoring, maybe 4, are the Bills, Dolphins, Lions, Vikings, Eagles and Commanders, and Chiefs, Colts. So I'll give you a minute there, Jeff. What are you taking out of those 4 games when you look at that? Bills, Dolphins, Lions, Vikings, Eagles, Commanders, Chiefs, Colts. What are you looking for there? What do you expect? And what do you think is kind of like that lead pipe lock DFS wise this week?
Especially from a DFS standpoint, I talk a lot about putting together a lineup from a stacking perspective, just, who you think's going to hit the over and working off of that. The highest over under comes from the Buffalo Miami game this week. I set my stack DFS lineup. I usually do a couple lineups. One's the stacking one where you kind of take a few from who you think's going to score the most, have one on a comeback just because you have to think that somebody's going to have to come back in the game and make some receptions or whatever it may be. So that Bills Miami game is very interesting to me, especially given how the Buffalo defense has performed. Seeing how Miami did last week, it should be very interesting to see how they perform against the Buffalo defense, because Josh Allen, the Bills are going to put up points, and that's where I'm going heavy as far as stack is concerned.
Yeah, I like it. And, one more injury report. Micah Hyde for Buffalo out for the season. That's a blow to their defense. I love that game offensively. I expect the Bills to win that game. However, I think there's a very good opportunity for that Miami offense to do some things fantasy wise. And for me, that game, I go right to Jalen Waddle. I'm just absolutely in love with him. And then seeing last week where both guys were able to have a big game, Waddle and Hill. So now maybe you're feeling like you're not necessarily flipping a coin and trying to pick the right one of those two each week. Maybe they can consistently both perform well on a weekly basis. And then you're going to laugh. The Lions, Vikings, the Lions are putting up some points, and that can't be whether we're talking about Ramen Noodle St. Brown, DeAndre Swift, only 7 touches last week, and the guy went for double-digit fantasy points. And they're giving them up as fast as they're scoring them, so you got to love that Lion-Viking game. And then one thing I got to say, and you're going to laugh at me, but I'm looking at the juice in that Eagles-Commanders game. And I mean, Jalen Hurts is absolutely become the real deal in that Eagle offense. But, and here, you remind people about
you want to say it.
You remind people about not betting with your heart, choosing players with your heart, and that makes sense. I'm going to remind people that in fantasy football, it don't matter if the team wins, the player wins. He can throw 17 interceptions. He can fumble 9 times. He can butt fumble 3 times. But if Carson Wentz is going to continue to throw 40 to 50 times a game to Curtis Samuel and Dotson and McLaren and everybody else and throw for those 350 yards and 2 to 3 touchdowns, I'll take the trash points that I got from them last week, and I'll bank on getting them all again this week too, Mesh.
At least from a fantasy perspective, I'm a bit blown away by Washington this year. I had zero faith in Carson Wentz in that offense. I mean, I think we all had some faith in McLaurin and Gibson, but you didn't expect them to come out with the numbers that Wentz is putting up between those guys and Samuel and Dotson. There's a lot of pieces there that have made them quite the viable option. But I'm glad you brought up, and not to go back to the earlier conversation, I'm glad you brought up Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle from Miami, just because, we'll look at some wide receivers a little bit more in depth. But if you're talking about from a daily standpoint, both these guys are having tremendous years. And if you want to, at least through the first couple games, and if you want to have a little bit of value and have some good value as far as a daily is concerned, Waddle this year has 50.3 points in fantasy through 2 games. Hill has 50.5.
Wow.
You got Waddle with 24 targets, 15 receptions. Hill 25 targets, 19 receptions. So they're getting kind of similar numbers, but you're saving about $900 as far as from a daily perspective with Waddle as opposed to Hill. So there's a lot of those interesting ones, especially as far as this week is concerned. But I'm glad you brought those guys up. But to go back to the Washington thing, I guess I shouldn't be surprised anymore at some of the ridiculous stuff that comes out each year. There's always something. And Carson Wentz this year is that something.
For 2 weeks in, he is that. I don't know how long it's going to last, but so talking about guys we like, let's quickly talk about guys that we want to stay away from this week. Sure. From a fade week 3 perspective, and I'm going matchup here, and we're playing ping pong with these guys, but I think this is kind of what you have to go do throughout the NFL all year is play matchup. And I'm staying away from the Green Bay Packer offense this week, being at Tampa. Tampa doesn't have their full array of weapons. Mike Evans is suspended. They are banged up. I think that they would love to keep Aaron Rodgers off the field and feed Leonard Fournette as much as possible. The Packers are just shot and wide out. They're playing a great defense. And as much as I loved what Aaron Jones did last week and what they've been doing with both Jones and Dillon, that Tampa rush defense, I believe, is ranked 3rd or definitely in the top 5 so far. So I am going to fade Packer plays this week. And, even because the Packers have a good defense too, I'm not even feeling, and obviously no Mike Evans, no Godwin. So who you really go with? I guess we got Brady and Fournette, but I'm not feeling great about that game in general. And, depending on who's on the field for that game, you could expect the 37-34 game with those two teams sometimes. And now in this case, I don't know. It wouldn't shock me if you had a 2017 game between those two tomorrow. Who are you looking at staying away from?
Especially given who's playing and more importantly, who's not playing. In the past, if this were 5 years ago, a Brady Rodgers matchup would be just fantasy gold. And for whatever reason this year, it just doesn't have the juice that it used to. Unfortunately, I guess I told you I'm a Patriots fan. I didn't jump off the bandwagon and go to Tampa just because Tom Brady's there. I'm still a Mac Jones guy now, but I'm still not going to root against the guy. Having said that, my fade this week, speaking of the Patriots, against the Patriots, I'm fading Lamar Jackson. He's 8,600 on FanDuel this week. He obviously had a huge week last week against Miami. It's in New England this week. We all know Belichick tries to do the best that he can to take away the person's best asset. I think he's going to throw a lot of different things at him. Not that Lamar Jackson hasn't seen a lot of different stuff now that he's been in the league, a few years, but in New England, it's going to be more of a difficult matchup, and I don't think he's going to have even close to the week that he had last week, or even come close, period, to having even a halfway decent week. So I'm fading Lamar Jackson this week.
I like that. I was thinking, Lamar Jackson on DraftKings, anyways. Josh Allen's 8,200, Lamar Jackson's 8,000, Mahomes 7,900 is the top three most expensive. And yeah, I had a hard time with Lamar this week. If there's one team that's going to be able to maybe just at least contain him a little bit, I think the Patriots could do that. And, he'll probably still be in the low 20s at least, but for 8K and with some of these other quarterbacks, I mean, Tua had the week he had last week and he's only 6,100 this week. So I mean, for 1,900 less, you could go Tua just as one quick example. Jalen Hurts is $400 less. So I'm with you on that, on Lamar, just given the week. I think that Patriots defense is going to bear down on
I didn't want to discount. Justin checked in, said, "What's up, fellas? What's up, man? Glad you can join us. Good to be here. Glad to have everybody, or at least some people tuning in on a Saturday night. Good to hear from you, my friend. Good to be part of this.
One of the Toilets to Titles proprietors, and we thank him for getting this up and running. And a few years later, we got a lot of guys doing this now, and quite the buzz. So Justin, our cap is off to you, and we thank you for the opportunity. We're fading the Packers offense. We're fading Lamar Jackson. DraftKings this year has been so hard with trying to cram, these top tier guys in. If you go 8,000 in your quarterback and then you take one good running back, you're really left with a lot of guys that are going to be in the 4,000 to 5,000 salary range. And, this week when we look at our cheap plays, or, when you're rounding out that lineup, Mace, who is that under the radar guy where you're going to save some money on, but you still feel confident he's going to get you the double digits scoring this week?
I already mentioned kind of my stack game of the Bills at Miami. So because of that, and because I'll be paying up for Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, you almost can't get away from those two guys with how big of a first couple weeks they've had, that tandem. It's almost like Brady and Randy Moss almost. So having said that, you got to come up with somebody who's got some. So I'm going Isaiah McKenzie. He's only 5,500 on FanDuel. He's kind of in that slot role. Obviously, Diggs gets a lot of attention. I think you're still going to see, is McKenzie going to have the same number of points that Diggs will have? Probably not, most likely not. But you're just hoping he's going to kind of get you a little bit extra that the other guy wouldn't have, so you could have those big guys in your lineup. So I'm going Isaiah McKenzie with the Bills at Miami, 5,500 on FanDuel.
I love McKenzie. All off season long, I thought to myself, I cannot wait to take advantage of McKenzie and the cheap DFS price. And then I never root for an injury, but as soon as one of those Buffalo wideouts go down, like Gabe Davis last, and McKenzie really gets some playing time, I'm excited to see what he can do. But anybody that knows me knows that I like to go with what I know. I will ride the wave where it takes me. And for the third straight week, and still only 5,100 on DraftKings, despite the fact that he's been over 20 both of the first 2 weeks, I will go with my man, Curtis Samuel. I mean, 15 receptions, 133 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and 20 targets so far, 5 rushes for 38 yards. So the fact that this guy is catching the ball, he's rushing the ball, he's averaged 10 touches a game through these first 2 weeks for 5,100 home against Philly. Philly's going to put up some points. We'll go back to those trash fourth quarter points. I want them. I can't wait to get them from Mr. Wentz and Curtis Samuel.
There's always that one guy. I can't disagree with you. I honestly can't. With how Washington has been going, I can't disagree with you with the numbers that Samuel has been putting up, man.
I feel like a lot of people thought that this would be Jacksonville through 2 weeks, like kind of what the Washington offense has done. I feel like a lot of us thought it would be Lawrence and it would be Kirk, who's been very good. Kirk's been great for them so far. A lot of people liked Evan Ingram at tight end for Jacksonville coming into the season. He's had a lot of targets and touches and stuff. I feel like, obviously the young running back to go with Robinson, but I feel like Washington is kind of turned into that so far. But I cut you off. What were you going to say?
No. We've been talking a lot about wide receivers. I don't think anybody would maybe disagree with me saying at this point, I get it on FanDuel. You already have 3 spots for wide receivers and 2 for running backs. And then you have a flex. The kind of the trendy pick in the past or the obvious pick would be a running back at flex in the past. Can anybody disagree with me so far this season to put another wide receiver at flex based on what we've seen? I mean, whether it be Taylor or Henry or McCaffrey or whoever it is, can those guys even stack up to the Cooper Kupp, the St. Browns, even the Curtis Samuels of the world? It seems this year is the year of the wide receiver. And I think flex-wise, especially in a half PPR to FanDuel is, I don't know how you can't go wide receiver these days based on what we've seen so far, at least the first 2 weeks. I don't know if you agree with me.
I do. I mean, if you think about Kupp versus Jonathan Taylor, Kupp's been better, and you could run that. I mean, Curtis Samuel has been, over 40 points in the first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But, I think especially on the cheaper end of the DFS scale. So we're talked about, even Greg Dortch for Arizona, for example, the rookie, he's got 11 catches, a touchdown, 120 yards. He's averaged about 14 points a game. He's 4,300 on DraftKings.
Right.
I can tell you there's no running back at 4,300 where you're going to feel good about 15 points. Now, You get a little later into the season, you have some more injuries. You've got more Jeff Wilson Juniors who are, coming up and starting to start games at a lower salary. But right now, no, I agree with you 100%. Wide receiver, especially in a PPR. And I got to be honest, and we're talking DFS now, but any league at this point and I know it's still standard, but I can't stand any league at this point that's not a PPR. I just feel like it's a little behind the times. But that being said, in wide receiver too, like Michael Thomas, that's an interesting story coming out of New Orleans. And, he went for 22 week 1, 18 for week 2. He's only 5,900. So now you got a guy who was a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL just a few years ago. He's finally come back. He's putting the numbers up. He's averaging 20 a game on DraftKings, and he still has only escalated to 5,900. So I feel like, to your point, not only are they cheaper, they're better value. For whatever reason, I feel like when a wide receiver starts to perform well, it still takes longer for these DFS sites to hike their salary, where you get a running back, a surprise running back with one good week. I mean, Mattinson, who's the backup, is like 5,700 in Minnesota. Right. And Michael Thomas is sitting there $200 more expensive. So it's a great point. And, I think people's behavior from a fantasy perspective is always go running back heavy historically, especially when you got some old guys like us who've been doing it for 20 years now. But I think it's important that you allow yourself to kind of evolve with the game and the way the game has. For me, that's rookies. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, playing fantasy, there were less than a handful of rookies that would have a real fantasy impact in, over their first season. There weren't that many. Now, from Jamar Chase last year to, now you have to be open to drafting rookies or you're just going to be inferior. You're going to have an inferior team.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
But so that.
Go ahead, Joe.
No, what do you got?
No, I was just going to get into lineups as far as DFS for this week is concerned. I already mentioned kind of my stack one. I can get into my regular one. Stack one, obviously, I said I'm going heavy on the Buffalo Miami. I don't want to beat a dead horse. If we're going regular lineup that I'm looking at as far as mixing it up pretty good. If I'm starting, on the cheap side, I'm looking at both quarterback and defense on the cheap side because I'm going heavy, expensive a little bit at wide receiver. So I'm going Mac Jones, quarterback, versus Baltimore at home, 6,400. Not that I have a ton of faith in Mac Jones putting up a ton of points, but when I tell you my wide receivers and everybody else, it kind of makes sense. Defense-wise, Kansas City and Indianapolis. Indianapolis hasn't showed me anything that they can produce anything. So Kansas City only being 4,100 on FanDuel, I think, is the way to go. Everything in between. Running back, I've got Rashad Penny at home against Atlanta, 6,200. Khalil Herbert with Chicago at home versus Houston. He's only 6,000. I get it. Montgomery's the starter. I'm hoping maybe they give Khalil Herbert, some touches here and there in the red zone. He can punch it in almost like a Green Bay kind of role with like the Jones Dillon kind of thing. I'm looking Chicago looking similar maybe with Montgomery and Herbert. I guess we'll see because I'm going heavy at wide receiver. Like I said, I'm going St. Brown. The reason I'm going St. Brown as opposed to, I know I've been heavy on the Cooper Kupp train, but if I'm going to give you some numbers, St. Brown this week on FanDuel, 7,800, Cooper Kupp, 9,800. So far this year with two games, St. Brown, 51.3 points, Cooper Kupp, 51.6 points. St. Brown is like the Cooper Kupp of last year. I mean, not that Cooper Kupp still is not the guy, but if you're talking $2,000 less on DFS, why would you not? Why would you even look at somebody else besides St. Brown first? So going St. Brown, we already discussed Waddle, why I'm doing that. He's 7,500 at home versus Buffalo. Mike Williams seems to be, getting some good targets. He's a big target for the Chargers now that it's a big X factor if Justin Herbert isn't playing, but Mike Williams, 7,000. And at tight end, I'm going Kelsey. You can't stray away from him. He's another big-time wide receiver, essentially, 7,800. He's kind of the guy in Kansas City. There's no way to go away from him, in my opinion, as far as tight end is concerned. And then flex-wise, I'm going Marquise Brown at home versus the Rams. He's 7,000. That's why I'm going heavy wide receiver this week.
Yeah, no, I like a lot of those wide out plays. Arizona's going to have to score some points to keep up with the Rams. So again, if it's trash points or whatnot, I don't care. Give me those, Hollywood Brown targets. DraftKings for me, we're starting with Jalen Hurts. Again, that's the ride the wave theme. He's averaging 30.9 through 2 weeks on DraftKings. Everything about him from the eye test has looked great. The AJ Brown acquisition has just changed everything about that offense. They made it so much more dynamic. And Hurts has just had a nice, easy schedule so far too. I think Detroit, Minnesota, and now Washington. So I'm gonna keep on riding that wave. And 7,600, it's a phenomenal point. Would you like to have Kupp over Brown? From a feel-good perspective, yeah, but you make a great point. Challenge yourself to dig into that extra minute of research to save $2,000, but to not even have a real point gap like that. You have to be doing that, especially when we're talking big tournaments, to have any chance whatsoever. So I like that a lot, and I kind of feel it's on a lesser scale, but Hurts $500, $600, $700 cheaper than Allen and Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. I'm going Dalvin Cook for the first time this year, 7,900, home against Detroit. So I am picking on that Detroit matchup. Cook he's 1,000 less or 1,100 less than Jonathan Taylor, 900 less than McCaffrey. So I think Cook's going to have his first big game of the season home against Detroit. Miles Sanders is going to be my second running back, 5,500. I think that's a steal. He's looked great so far. He's got 30 rushing attempts to go along with another 5 receptions. He's hit the end zone once so far. So I like Miles Sanders for that price. The wideouts, see, I'm opposite from you with this lineup. My wideouts are the cheap spot. My number one wideout for the week, Michael Thomas, $5,900. They're at Carolina. He's averaging 20 a game. They need to bounce back. New Orleans is a well-run team. They're a team that normally bounces back after a bad loss, which they had last week against Tampa. I'm going Curtis Samuel, as we all know. I'm surprised there's not a poster showing up right now, like a hologram in the background of my basement. I'll have to work on that for next week.
Yeah, you'll have a fat head in your wall next week. Don't worry about it.
Yes. 5,100. He's averaging 21 a game. They're home against Philly. Don't think Washington's going to win that game, but I certainly think they're going to gain some yards, especially in the second half. Third wideout, really going down the wire here. But again, Greg Dortch, Arizona, 4,300. Guys averaging 14 points a game through 2 weeks. No Ronald Moore still there. No Wesley, whatever his last name is. I don't even remember it. So obviously no DeAndre Hopkins first 6 games in that suspension. So and they're going to have to throw to win that game. So I'm going to go Dortch 4,300. Evan Ingram 3,700 for Jacksonville at tight end. Guy's got 11 catches and 12 targets for the first 2 games. So that's very efficient. We just got to get him in the red zone. I'm flexing Jalen Waddle at 6,800. I mean, Jalen Waddle to me is each week solidifying himself as a number one wideout. And the fact that Tyreek Hill has not slowed him down. You're saving this week. You are saving $800 on DraftKings going Waddle versus Hill. He's averaging 30 per so far. So I love that. And then I will, I will appreciate that you're not a homer, Maish, and you can shoot straight about that Patriot offense. I know you're going Mac Jones, but I am going to go the Ravens defense at 3,000. The Ravens defense was embarrassed last week, home against Miami. Another well-run, well-coached team organization. I don't believe they will be embarrassed again. And, I don't expect them to score 30 on the Patriots, that defense, but I do expect the Raven defense to bounce back. Then the other funny thing, too, pay attention to defensive scoring. The Ravens gave up 42 to Miami last week, and on DraftKings, they still had 7 points. So it doesn't take much on DraftKings to get your 10 defensive points. Just something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
But
certainly an interesting week. I'll tell you, and again, we can't stress enough how much we miss Mikey. I love Mikey behind the scenes. It's better to have him in front of the camera as always. So we look forward to Mikey being back in the lineup.
Absolutely. So 12 hours and 55 minutes or so from now, we will be back for the Blitz. The Sunday morning, stardom, sit-em. You need an hour in advice, we'll be there for an hour. You need 2 hours of advice, we'll be there for 2 hours. And we will answer all of the questions. In the meantime, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, like and subscribe to YouTube. Visit t2t.com for the best articles in the business. Become a Patreon, 5 tiers. As our boy Dirty Job says, if you're going to click the button, just click the 5-star review. Why would you click any other? That's it. Week 3. We got it 13 hours from now, Maish. It was great to have a little
Let's get it going.
2 tickets to
see you guys.
Reunion.
Have a great Sunday. Thank you, guys.
See you tomorrow.
Absolutely.